So I wish to welcome all of you in this series of policy forums that we've been having. Every time I say policy forums, something goes twist in my head because I prefer to say policy fora. But I guess in some countries, the word forums is more popular than the word fora, which is the Queen's English. Nevertheless, welcome to this. Today we will be talking about agricultural policy, and Professor Gurpreet Singh will take the lead in today's work. Just to say that ever since I went to agriculture school here in India, I've had an interest in agricultural policy, although I was in those days more engaged in the science of agriculture. And I've observed over the years that agriculture universities, they are mainly engaging with policy from the agricultural economics division. And their main output is scientific in nature. And one of the things I raised recently at a forum in China, hosted by the China Agriculture University, in which our colleague, Professor Milindo, has been very engaged, our university has been engaged, and so on. One of the things that occurred to me was that agriculture universities and public policy schools, a partnership between these academic institutions might make sense. I raised it at that forum, at which there were mainly vice presidents, presidents, vice chancellors of universities. I raised this issue of agriculture universities and public policy schools working together to advance the debate, the advocacy, and the adoption of progressive agricultural policies in countries. In India, when I was a student, we had 680 agricultural universities and colleges, as I recall. I was at Pusa Institute, and I recall because we used to admit 360 students per year. That was it. So only 1 out of 2 gold medalists in India were accepted for their master's or PhD degrees at Pusa. So we must have a huge cadre of agricultural academics. The questions we will have to pose, that you will be posing as the panelists, will have to be, what are the strengths and weaknesses of agricultural policy in the country today? How pro-farmer are our agricultural policies? How pro-growth are our agricultural policies? Is there a necessary trade-off between agriculture's contribution to GDP per capita and farmers' well-being or not? These are all questions of great importance if we are going to all work together to 2047, at which time India is talking about a vision of a developed country. What is that going to look like? What will the farmers of India look like? What will their livelihoods look like? These are really burning and important questions. I haven't looked through all the abstracts very carefully of the presenters, but I'm sure in our discussions, all of this will be addressed in one way or another. So I consider that this is of vital interest to this country. Agricultural policy, economic growth, vis-a-vis agriculture science, and so on. I'll just close in these few opening remarks by mentioning that Gurpreet and I and a few other colleagues from Punjab Agriculture University, Avanindra, Professor Thakur, and others are working towards bringing together public policy schools in India and agriculture universities to advance this debate. So this is a really exciting area of work for me, and I know for many others. And with those few words, I'd like to welcome our Dean, Professor Sudarshan, to welcome you as well.
Thank you, Naresh. And so, the title here, Agricultural Policy, reminds me when I was a student at the Delhi School of Economics. I went to St. Stephen's College to listen to Krishna Menon, who was asked by the Students' Union to talk about foreign policy. And Krishna Menon started by saying that's very difficult to talk about a non-existent thing. Is there a foreign policy that India has, right? That's how he started. And to some extent, that seems to be applicable with respect to agriculture. There doesn't seem to be any coherent policy as such. It's a state subject. The union government is predominantly and overwhelmingly involved in it in terms of money. And there's, some confusion as to, if you say, what is India's agricultural policy? It's difficult to write a page about it. And my experience with this was when I joined UNDP in New Delhi, my first project that I was responsible for was with the MS Swaminathan Foundation. And we worked on, how to create, off-farm employment opportunities for people in rural India who are not going to become, second, third, fifth generation farmers. And they were not interested in following agriculture as their livelihood. So we decided that there would be a project where we would look at 15 agroclimatic zones in the country, and for each of them take 2 districts as a sample in each of the 15 zones and figure out what are the opportunities for employment and income generation that's not basic growing the grain or the vegetables and so on, food processing, this kind of a thing, silkworms, whatever it is, depending on the area. And we produced a report, and we thought we'd get a big policy success because we presented it to Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was finance minister, before he presented his first budget. And he decided that this is a very good idea and so on. And, Swaminathan has a certain persuasive ability, bless him. And so we created something called the Small Farmer Agri-Business Consortium at that time. And it was announced by Dr. Manmohan Singh in the first budget that this Small Farmer Agri-Business Consortium would take the lead in financing ventures in these 15 agroclimatic zones on the identified opportunities that we had, right? Now, Babu Dam then comes in and they said, no, you see, this cannot be entirely financed by the government of India. Agriculture is a state subject, and therefore whatever the government of India provides, it has to be matched by a provision in the budget of the respective states of the country. Now, of course, government of India didn't talk to states. There was no exercise in trying to convince them, persuade them, educate them, tell them what this is all about. This was a conversation between the Swaminathan and the finance minister. And so no state government had any clue about what this is. So obviously they've made no provision in their budgets to take advantage of the agro finance body. And it still exists, I discover, in the Government of India list of institutions. It still has staff, and they do precious little, I assume. A Small Farmer Agri-Business Consortium, you could look it up. It's there, but no state government has a corresponding office or an institution, to the best of my knowledge. So this is, we had such high hopes that, at last some academic research, some serious thinking would lead to some action, that is transference of policy recommendations and proposals to actual implementation and execution of something. Didn't happen. And so I'd say that we have to keep at it. But it is, if there is a stronger word than challenges, we should use it, because we are up against that. So with those words, I welcome all of you, but particularly Professor Dinesh Abrol. I had a friend in the Delhi Science Forum called D. Raghunandan, who first introduced me to your work, sir, and all your writings, which I've followed in Frontline, more recently in Wire. And I was thinking of you because I was asked to be on Shailesh Nayak headed a committee when they were drafting the STIP, Science, Technology, Innovation Policy. And we were a group about the governance of science policy. So we were recommending that there ought to be an entity that looks at what are all these scientific establishments doing. Are they meaningful? Is their work meaningful? Is it going to make a difference, to people? I mean, this is like the Gandhi talisman. Ask yourself, is it going to make any difference? And that the science governance is different from as science and technology and specializations in agriculture or chemistry or whatever it is that Government of India, DST, supports and funds. But they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get the idea that there's a need for a governing council, which is an accountability body, which is asking, what difference is your work in these science research institutes in wherever, whether it's in Bombay, Nagpur, wherever it is, what is it making? What difference does it make to the life of a farmer? Ask that question and then document what you've done. No, they wouldn't. They refused to accept that there needs to be. They said DST is enough. We do this. But we were saying no. But you have to be accountable to somebody, and there's got to be a group that represents the beneficiaries of science and technology policy. They have to have a voice, and they must be in a governing body to which you are accountable. And Shailesh Nayak and I gave up because we just couldn't get the DST people to agree to this, and they published this policy without any of this committee's recommendations. So it's uphill. So the work that we do, hopefully, trying to get the policy framework right is a challenge. And so that's why I say we need a stronger word than challenge. So thank you.
Okay, over to you, Gurpreet, please take it forward.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Dr. Gurpreet Singh, and I teach at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan and Professor Naresh, for encouraging us to deliver a panel on agriculture policy in India. And I'm very much in line with your thinking that there are a lot of debates around agriculture crisis in India and what are the challenges and impediments that are holding our agriculture to grow. And in the recent past also, that we can see that a lot of states, poor states, are also catching up in terms of agriculture productivity and production. Still, we are something is holding back agriculture as a profitable venture or a occupation. So that crisis is still lingering. But as a teacher at policy school, it's our responsibility to discuss more about policy challenges in agriculture sector. So I'll briefly introduce my panelists and the topics that we are covering in today's discussion. It will take me 5 minutes, then I will reflect upon my presentation, which will be of 12 to 15 minutes. Okay, so when we talk about agriculture policy, we need to also discuss a bit about the genesis of the active agriculture policy in India. So as we know, the mid of 1960 was a kind of turbulent period for Indian economy when our agriculture sector was not doing well, and we have consecutive years of drought. So we were heavily dependent upon imports from other countries, especially the US. So that time government commissioned a report to Ford Foundation. The title of this report was India's Food Crisis and Steps to Meet It. So this report actually summarizes the different policy challenges in India and what can be the way ahead. So this report recommended a comprehensive package for new agriculture strategy (NAS), which mainly the package of recommending the package of mechanization, new seed variety, and irrigation. So that was only possible to implement in India with the active support of the state. So when I'm saying state, it's not referring to the province, but all the state governments as well as the union government. So active support in terms of investment on land, machinery, irrigation, R&D, extension services. Therefore, in 1966-67, government took substantive measures in the following way. First, it boosted the public investment to increase the use of modern technology at the farm level. Second, the public investment on institutions. Third, developing supportive institutional mechanisms such as favorable price policy, cheap credit, input subsidy, and among others. So these were some of the instruments to support agriculture system and specifically the new agriculture strategy. So the results were quite visible by the late 1980s when India almost become food sufficient nation. So I'm not bringing in any other debate about the food security and availability. Those aspects are even remained unattended that time. But with the start of new economic reforms in the early 1991, this policy took a U-turn where the direct state level interventionist policies converted into more market-led, more open, globalized vision for agriculture development. So as a result, certain changes had happened during that time in 1991 onwards in terms of the quantum of public spending, its composition, then availability of credit, the terms of credits, input subsidy, and the entire marketing framework for agriculture produce. In this context, we would like to reflect upon 5 major aspects of agriculture policy in India. In recent past, I will be talking about public spending patterns, trends, and its likely implication on the contemporary conditions in agriculture. Secondly, my co-panelist, after me, Prachi will talk about input policies with specific focus on fertilizers, as Government of India is spending a lot of budgets on fertilizer subsidy in its annual budgets. Then Dr. Nivedita will talk reflect upon the agriculture produce marketing and with specific focus on the new agriculture marketing innovations such as contract farming. Then Professor Avnindra will share his views on agriculture credit in India. And lastly, our panelist who has joined online, Dr. Acharya, will speak on food sufficiency and different dimensions of food security in India. So as I see, the impact of policies are not directly on the farmers, but the availability of food and nutritional security in India. So now I will start my presentation, and this is, as I said, it's specifically on agriculture spending especially in the last 1 decade. Can you the next slide? Yeah. Oh. Yes. So as we know very well, I'm not spending much time on the literature of the role of public spending in India and how it transformed the Indian agriculture in the early years of Green Revolution. But there are a lot of literature on public spending, how the public spending on different aspects, research, development, land development, irrigation, extension services, flood control, etc., has significantly impacted in a positive way agriculture growth in the early years of 1970s and 80s. And there is a positive link that is there, the most of the studies found, between the investment on research and development and extension services and the state level productivity of agriculture. Possibly we can see the overall impact not only on the agriculture sector but on the reduction of poverty in the early years of 1980s, when there were a lot of debate on poverty and many programs were developed, and that's why the agriculture policy had a larger view over not only the production and productivity of farming but also on the rural poverty reduction. So but as I said, in the year of early years of 1990s, it took a total U-turn, and then the agriculture sector was significantly liberalized and globalized due to the Washington consensus that happened, and we had to take a few steps to enter into the new era of economic growth. So the market-led approach for farming policy strategy led to gross decline in that has been observed in terms of the decline in the government spending in agriculture and rural development heads. And this public investment fell from that was close to 3% in just before the adoption of new economic reforms to less than 2% by the end of 1990s. So the reduction was quite visible. So as a crisis, the lot of policy papers, they started discussing about the agrarian crisis in India, that the lot of research raised this issue in the early years of 2000s. So what were the main issues that discussed? The structural issues in the sector, slow income increase in last 2 decades. So now the discussion was not only about the productivity, but actually was about the increase in the income and the increase, the slow increase in the income and rapid increase in the cost structure of agriculture inputs. Then the debate, the third kind of debate I found is about the production crisis versus livelihood crisis. When we say that there's the slow increase in the income, as we know, the 55% of the around people in India are dependent upon agriculture sector, and the years of 2000, the percentage was even more than that, around you can see around 70%. So there are a lot of discussion regarding the livelihood crisis, and in the recent past, what are the policies that we adopted to cater to all these issues, or in nutshell, the agrarian crisis? First was very recently the vision about doubling the farmers' income by 2022. Then, and what was the formula? The farmer should realize at least 50% the value than the cost of their produce, right? And second, the promotion of FPOs, village producer organization, women SHGs, liberalization of agriculture commodities through various laws and amendments, financing of infrastructure for a light sector, creation of livelihood and infrastructure in rural areas. So as a policy boost, we can see there is a reduction in the early years of 2000s. Then there is again spike in the public expenditure on agriculture in the in the later part of 2000s. And then very recently, for last 7 to 8 years, there's a big push in the spending. So we can see the agriculture spending is increasing for last 7 to 8 years. But what has been the main impacts of these policy push on to realize the potential of agriculture is a big question. So what are the patterns of spending is a questionable, and then how we are how we are designing the entire budgeting for agriculture sector and the overall policy ecosystem. So I'm not going into the detail of methods and data I have used. I have used the Indian budget data for Union Government, Ministry of Finance. Then for state specific budgets, I have taken it from the concerned ministries of state governments. I'm not only taking into account the agriculture main sector, crop sector, but also the other allied activities, animal husbandry, forestry, fisheries, food storage, warehousing. So spending on all the main aspects of farming. So my first question I am addressing is, who should support agriculture more? As Dean Sudarshan has talked about that agriculture is a state subject, but the union government is overwhelmed with the agriculture regulations and investment or expenditure in general. So who should support agriculture more is a question. So agriculture is a state subject, we all know. So how effective is the role of state government? And second is, what extent union government is contributing? So I compiled this data for 6 years. Now you can see the red bar, the red part of these bars represent the state government budgets, all state government budgets on agriculture. Then blue bar represent the union government spending in net terms. So you can see it's very clearly the role of union government is significant. The union government is spending more than that of the combined spending from all the state governments. So it's almost like 65% of the entire spending on agriculture is being allocated by the union government. So first point is that there is a weakening of budgetary provisioning by the state government. So if we see the quantum of budgetary support by the state government, it's really insignificant. So in this table, you can see I have divided the budgetary spending per capita budgetary spending. Per capita means per capita household spending on agriculture households. So here only 4 states, Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Punjab and Andhra Pradesh, they are spending around 2,000 per annum on agriculture per capita agriculture household, and it constitutes around 11% of the total agriculture household. And on the lowest side, which says 1,000 per annum on per agriculture household, 44% of the agriculture households fall in that category. So in terms of the extent of spending, and then there is a middle category. So around, if you club the moderate and low category, around 83% of the households, they receive around less than 2,000 per capita per annum. So if this is the extent of total support to agriculture sector by the state, we can think about the situation. So second issue is the directionality of spending by union and state government. So what do we mean by directionality? If we divide very simple terms, the budget in two different parts, So first I say is a sector-wide support measures. What are those sector-wide support measures? So it is the basically measures to augment the community-based resources such as ponds, extension services, storage, warehouse, residue management, machinery, etc. And all these are carried out through various schemes and programs like National Food Security Mission, Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, National Horticulture Mission, etc., Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. So these are the core schemes that facilitate these kind of support. And second is kind of support which benefit individual farmers directly. And these are basically the direct beneficiary transfers, DBTs, income support, compensations, etc. And the tools of these delivering these kind of support is the schemes such as PM Kisan, Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, interest subvention schemes. So if we divide, categorize the budget in these broadly in these two categories, we can see there is a complete shift of budgeting more towards individual farmers centric direct support measures. So almost 75% of the budget is being delivered through the cash driven programs. And on the other hand, we have around 25% of the budget being delivered through the more core sector schemes like Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, PM Krishi Sinchai Yojana, etc. So, but that was for the union government. Actually, the task of the Department of Agriculture at the union level is to see the planning process at the pan India level. But when it comes to the level of state government, the picture is more worrisome. Here, I have taken the data for 7 states. Across states, you will find the same kind of budgetary template. So all the states that have been represented here are also providing budgetary support more through the cash-driven programs. So here, one thing to note that is the problem is not with the quantum of budget. The more problem is with the kind of budgetary template of the states. So why we should worried about the such kind of budgetary spending? It impacts the budget in 2 ways. First is, as a result, there is a shortfall in the core infrastructure at the grassroots level, such as storage of staff, extension workers, then the dearth of labs available at the grassroots level. That's why the out-of-pocket expenditure is increasing. That is becoming the cause of worry. And second is the declining capacity of institutions in carrying out the support activities at the grassroots level. Because if you are not sufficiently spending on the institution, then they don't have bandwidth to increase the staff problem. It's not moving. Yeah. So declining the institutional support, when I say there's a understaffing at the grassroots level, district and below district level. Due to that, underutilization leads to the understaffing leads to underutilization of resources under core schemes. So in the last 4 to 5 years, the report by the parliamentary report of the Department of Agriculture says that 70,000 crore money have been surrendered to Government of India by Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. So then we can just say that the problem is not with the quantum of money, but something else. Then difficulty in carrying out the planning and execution activity for core program such as RKVY, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, etc. For instance, in 2021, only 17% of the funds allocated funds have under RKVY in Madhya Pradesh could be utilized. Only 17%. Then likewise, the extent of utilization of the available funds in RKVY has been low for the number of other states like Maharashtra 21%, Odisha 24%, Chhattisgarh 38%. So that was the big problem with the budgetary template. The fourth issue is now we are shifting from the sustainability aspect of agriculture to the risk management. So from the entire budget of Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, if we divide in different categories, input based budgeting, sustainability based budgeting, output management budgeting, then the risk management based budgeting. Now we are actually providing 62% of the entire budget on risk management. So what does that mean? The occurrence of floods and droughts are increasing. So we have to spend a lot of money on insurance schemes, providing income support subsidies and other such kind of programs like debt waiver, etc. So we are not devoting much budget on the systemic part of agriculture like input, R&D, etc., etc. So in nutshell, who are at the loss? Due to the conditionality attached to such kind of budgeting or the schemes, the vulnerable groups lack the benefit, because the conditionality means if I need to take benefit from PM Kisan or any other scheme at the state level, I need to have some land. So in the process, the landless farmers are not taking benefit of it. The tenant farmers, women at large are working in agriculture, but the land ownership is skewed. So they are not getting benefit of it. Then further weakening of local institutions. Because if we are running the programs through banking system, then there is no need to, design and plan at the local level. Like RKVY is being designed at the local level. Then what is the role of civil society organization left with? And similarly, in the case of PRIs, Panchayati Raj institutions, now you visit any panchayat, they don't actually talk about agriculture planning. So they only talk about one or two programs, sanitation or MG Narega, how to, burn the money. But in the planning sense, they are not devoting much time. So the way forward could be more budgetary resources are required for agriculture at the level of states to cater the state specific need of the agriculture sector. A comprehensive stimulus for a light sector will help small farmers to diversify their income level. Third is budgetary provision toward agriculture and the light sector need to be directed more towards bringing about sector-wide support measures. There is also a need for more inclusive policy paradigm where we can include women farmers, landless, tenant farmers, or alternative agriculture in the budgeting priorities. Lastly, the state government's budgetary support for agriculture sector should be redesigned to complement the support provided by the union government. There is a need to provide the capacity to the state governments so that they can redesign their budgetary template in order to cater to the local challenges. So with this, I stop here and invite other speakers. Thank you very much. Raj.
Geeta has how much time?
15, 17.
Leave it to you.
So thank you everyone. Thank you, Professor Gurpreet, for this presentation and setting the backdrop for what I wanted to say. And thank you, JSGP, for giving us a chance. So we are all working in isolation on agriculture, but this gave us a chance to put things together and see what all of us in the same department are doing. So my presentation is about fertilizer decontrol in India and what is happening here. I have been tracking this fertilizer sector for quite a long time. So I would say there's been a recent change. So after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, things have changed internationally. So my previous paper, which is also published in the book Distress in the Fields and is published in Social Scientist, looked at fertilizer sector before those geopolitical changes took place. So this is a recent version. This is coming out in the Indian Political Economy Association report. And here I have looked at what is the recent changes that have happened in fertilizer sector. Now, when I say fertilizer, just to say that these synthetic chemical fertilizers are of crucial importance for India's agriculture, because if given the demand, the scale of demand for food, domestic production of food has to be the mainstay of supply of food in agriculture. And no matter how much we want to push for organic agriculture and all of that, we do not currently have enough to be able to sustain that kind of production of food that we need at the moment. So chemical fertilizers are not something that we can do away with, just like that. We need a different kind of policy measure to look at it, something which is long-term, something which is sustainable. Otherwise, landing up in a situation like Sri Lanka is not very difficult. So the three main fertilizers, the macro fertilizers that we have in India are nitrogen, phosphorus and potash. Nitrogen comes from urea, phosphorus comes from the main fertilizer that you know as diammonium phosphate or DAP, and potash comes from muriate of potash or MOP. Now for all your rice, wheat, etc., you need nitrogen, you need phosphorus. You need potash specifically for things which grow, which are root vegetables like potatoes and onions. With this little bit of background, excuse me. Okay, so meanwhile this is fixing. These 2-3 fertilizers that we have are the major macro fertilizer. You obviously need some micro, zinc, sulfur, etc. But so what used to happen before the 1990s, as Professor Singh already sort of covered in his presentation, that most of the things were under the control of the state. So fertilizers were also under the control of the state under a specific scheme called the retention pricing scheme. At that time, the state was giving subsidy. Mind you that the state is giving subsidy now also. So nothing has changed in terms of the subsidy, but the mechanism inbuilt has changed. What happened earlier was, before 1991, fertilizers were a part of the Essential Commodity Act. So they were treated essential, extremely important for our food supply. And so therefore, the price of fertilizers was controlled by the government, price and distribution. But now the recent change that has happened is that after 1991, government tried to successively decontrol fertilizer prices. So they started with ad hoc concession schemes, etc., and started with decontrol. Now the idea was that let's decontrol phosphorus and potash and not decontrol urea. And why did they choose that? So there are multiple versions of the story going around. The major reason has been political, because given the agrarian distress, having to decontrol all the kind of prices for fertilizers would get, this government would get a lot of backlash from farmers, because prices shoot up, input prices goes up, the cost goes up. So they did not decontrol urea, they only decontrolled phosphorus and potash. And then they introduced a scheme in 2010, which was called the nutrient-based subsidy scheme, in which there was no kind of fixation of prices at all. There was no partial control. It was totally decontrolled. The idea was that the price of fertilizers other than urea can be fixed by fertilizer companies according to their will, and there can be the condition that was given was that you have to be reasonable in the pricing. Now, what is reasonable was never defined anywhere. Okay, so what happened was that just as this policy came out in 2010, the policy fertilizer prices manifolded. So I'll just tell you the price of MOP increased from something around 4,500 per ton from 2009-10 to 12,040 per ton. So just in 1 year, it tripled the prices. And then right now, from the latest data, it's around 36,000 per ton. So you can understand the amount of money that you are spending on fertilizers. This is potash. Then DAP also, we've come from 9,350 per ton to 27,000 per ton. Urea, because right now it is statutorily controlled by the government, it's around 242 per bag or 5,360 per ton. So this is the only sort of the input that farmers can afford, and that is why when you hear reports that there is too much nitrogen in Indian soil or there's too much urea in the Indian soil, it's not a choice that Indian farmer is making. It's a choice that he's made to, he has to, because he can't afford the other two. So there is that urea bias going on, and with this kind of lopsided policy, actually the urea bias increased because you made urea cheaper than the other. So the vision of this policy actually was, I don't know, it sort of failed. And the idea of reasonable prices. So CAG report, they did an investigation in 2015 and they looked at what is this reasonable prices. And they said in the report, and I quote, that these reasonableness is neither explained nor defined in the policy, nor did the Department of Fertilizer issue any implementation guidelines about what is reasonable. So you can just about put any price and any kind of thing will go. Now, before sort of moving to what is happening in the geopolitical world, one more thing is that you are increasing the backdrop is you're increasing the urea bias, and you came up with this NBS policy so that you can control the burden on the exchequer, so that fertilizer subsidies could go down. That was the idea. But fertilizer subsidies have actually increased. So this NBS had made things worse on all the accounts. Urea bias increased, fertilizer subsidy increased, and decontrol happened. All kinds of spurious brands of fertilizers have come up in the markets because there's no one brand there. So has a major repercussion. Now, talking about what is happening recently in the global world, I have just summarized the whole changes into 4 major changes in the fertilizer sector. You see, India, although we produce a lot of urea, we do not have enough production for DAP, and we do not have enough production, no production for MOP, because we do not have the potash. So potash we totally import. And phosphorus also, it's produced from rocks, and we have very limited rocks somewhere in Rajasthan, so that's how we produce a little bit of phosphorus. And we used to import in an exceptional policy measure, which was the late Professor Abhijit Sen. He sort of came up with this measure that instead of importing phosphorus rock, import phosphoric acid. And India was the only country doing that. So we were importing phosphoric acid and making DAP out of it. And this was a unique thing that India did and still do for a very long time, so that we could continue to have some production of DAP. But despite all that, we have very limited domestic production, and we are highly dependent on the imports. Now, what happened was that a lot of our urea comes from China, and China banned their export of fertilizers because they had a shortage of coal. Now, when you make urea, not going into the science of it, but you can make urea by using natural gas, or you can use coal, one of these two things. So, coal, naphtha, natural gas, these are the things that you use. And because they had a shortage of coal, so they banned the export of urea. Then Russia-Ukraine war happened, and Russia is our major exporter of phosphorus. So we had to, deal with that problem. Then potash was coming from Belarus, but Belarus had sanctions coming from US into 2021, and ammonium nitrate and urea were coming from Russia, and those were also cut down because of the Russia-Ukraine war. So all these changes happened approximately at the same time, 21-22, and you had these changes disrupting the global supply of fertilizers. Now, this is a very So this is a very recent graph. It shows what has happened to international prices from February 21 to May 23. And in this period, you see that there was a rise in fertilizer prices for some time because of all these geopolitical changes. But over time, fertilizer prices have stabilized internationally and they have come down again. Now, all of this happened and our government said, no, nothing is going wrong, everything is going good, there's no shortage of fertilizers. And I have taken out quotes from the ministers. This is our fertilizer ministers, and they are saying that there is absolutely no shortage of fertilizer. And this is happening, okay, during the COVID time, they said there's no shortage of fertilizer. Then they said fertilizer availability is adequate to meet. They also said that you are spreading rumors. There's no fertilizer shortage in the country at all. Okay, so this was the version that was given by the government. And every other country was facing shortages because the fertilizer comes from these few countries and they are having all kinds of geopolitical challenges. No matter how much your domestic production is, you are going to suffer. And the second important thing is that not only you have a few of these countries which do this, but you have, globally speaking, a monopoly in the fertilizer sector. So there are only 10 large companies, largest companies in the world, which supply 86% of MOP. There are 38% of your total fertilizer sales is coming from just 7 companies in the world. So these are big agglomerates, monopoly agglomerates, and they decide what happens to the food we eat, what happens to the fertilizer that we get. Now, this was the statements of the government during the same time that there is no shortage. This is what I found using the data. So what I did was a very simple, very simplistic measure. The measure was that I took what is the availability of a particular fertilizer in January 2019. Now 2019, not just January, I mean different months, but in 2019. So 2019 was a period that was not affected by COVID, that was not affected by these geopolitical changes. And now if you compare, so in 2021 January, the availability of DAP was 40% less than the availability in 2019. Now, why am I making these monthly comparisons? Is because in different months you have different crops, so you have different needs for fertilizers. In April 2021, the shortfall reached 82% of the availability of April 2019, and April is a season when a lot of your sowing happens. Then August and September, availability of DAP was 74% less. Between August and December, MOP was 70% less. This urea, which is supposedly controlled, and we have quite a lot of production of domestic urea. Yes, we were 52% short, had a 52% shortfall for domestic urea. And right now also, 2023, 2024, if I continue this analysis, there is a persistent shortfall. We've still not been able to make. These are some of the glimpses of people standing in queues to get fertilizers. And again, these are some of the glimpses that there is no shortage of fertilizers. This is just, I've plotted the same information. If the bar is down, it shows that this is the shortfall that you have compared to 2019 for all the 3 major fertilizers. I'm not giving into the graph. Now, what happened due to these shortage of fertilizers is that you had widespread black marketing. Okay. Now, when people were selling fertilizers in these, shops, they said that not only you buy the fertilizer, but can you also please buy the pesticide that we are selling? So they started to tag things together, and spurious fertilizers came. Then they had the whole system has changed because of direct benefit subsidy, the transfer in fertilizers. They have introduced Aadhaar, and they've linked Aadhaar to fertilizer. Now what happens is that you go as a farmer, you present your Aadhaar card, and you get you can get to buy the fertilizer using the point of sale machine, just like an ATM kind of thing. Now, the problem here is that they started, because these were queues and there was shortage, so they started saying that if you're a 1 acre farmer, you can get this much. If you're a 2 acre farmer, you can get this much. Now, they started rationing fertilizers during using this, and because of that, people who were tenants, who did not own land, had to go to the black market. They did not have, so we conducted field studies to look at what is happening, and these are some of the observations that we found. Now, many fertilizer companies, as I said, force the farmers to buy pesticides, biofertilizers, nano urea, all those things, and sale of spurious fertilizers happened. In all of this, in all of these changes, your domestic prices also surged extremely. So they, So government, just as this happened, government thought, because DAP has risen from 24,000 per ton to 31,000 and is now recently around 36,000 per ton. So because these are rising prices, government thought, we have to do something immediately, and they started increasing subsidy. But the subsidy measures come a little much too late than required. And those subsidies, mind you, is not the same as the subsidy which goes to the farmer's account. The subsidy goes to the companies. In all this time, so companies are getting to have their own prices, and then on top of it they get the subsidies. They had enough margins. The global agglomerates I was talking about in the beginning, that who own the fertilizer industry abroad, globally, during this 21 to 23 time period made 36% profits, which is a huge profit margin. That was they were only able to achieve this much when we had the 2007-8 crisis. So you can imagine that how people, this is opportunity and adversity that we see that the global agglomerates made, and this is the same time that Indian big fertilizer companies really had high profits. And government kept on coming with notifications that we are increasing the subsidy, but because there's shortage going on, you do not have enough domestic production, and your subsidy measures only come late when people have stood in queues and a lot has happened. All of this actually did not help much. And for a lot of inputs like potash fertilizer, subsidy was not increased until April 2022. Somehow rice and wheat were more important than potato and onions. So they did not give enough importance to increasing subsidies for potash. Now, if I were to have just made a very small, again, calculation to reflect what has happened to the subsidies, if we account for depreciation of account rate, exchange rate, the subsidy on phosphates in October 2023 is only 9% higher than the subsidy in 2020, whereas prices have surged by 4.6 times. So this is the kind of thing that is happening. And recently in October, because during when this was going on so much in the media that prices are rising and we do not have enough fertilizer, government came up with some measures to increase the subsidy. But just as farmers sort of calmed down, they had again cut the subsidies. So there's a drastic cut in October again, and we still now have those persistent shortages going on. Now this is a photograph actually clicked by a colleague of mine. She's from FAO here and she's just joined us. So she was doing her field survey in Siwani in Haryana, and she clicked this photograph, and our professor sent this to us to saying this is the kind of queues that is going on. The same time 2023, this is the ministers, so ministers also were saying similar statements that there is no shortage. Now, what other than increasing those ad hoc subsidies the government has done? The government has come up with new things: neem coated urea, sulfur gold urea. Okay, most of these are pseudoscientific measures. There is no science that adding neem to urea will increase your productivity. There have been scientific papers on it, and nothing like adding neem or adding sulfur to urea will increase the productivity. But these are the kind of measures that we have come up. There has been no major expansion in production capacity of fertilizers. We still have major import dependence. And with this current slash that has happened in subsidies in October 2023, you have another production crisis in the making. Because no amount of cow dung or other things can help you sustain the amount of food production that you need. So if you want to go organic, then that has to be a long-term planning. It has to come through other things, not just cow dung. So yes, ad hoc and untimely measures by the government to control the impact of increased fertilizer prices has actually led to a bad situation. And this all started because of the kind of policy that we had, that we decontrolled fertilizers. We thought that this is no more an important essential input, and the fertilizer companies can decide the price that they want. But apparently this is not the case. So with this presentation, I'd like to close on what is happening to our fertilizer sector. We'll take the questions after the next speaker, please.
Rats. Come.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Nivedita. I work as assistant professor at Council for Social Development, and I would like to first of all thank JSGP Policy Forum for giving me this opportunity to present my views. And also, I would like to apologize for the disturbance created by my son, because I think as a working mother, I have two options: either to participate and bring him along, and the second one is to just skip the participation. So I think the option one is a better one. So which one?
Laptop has to be there.
Yeah, it's quite cold. He's also complaining. उधर वाला बता. So, Dr. Gurpreet has already set the context and talked about the transition of economy from food crisis to food self-sufficient Indian economy, and then the transition of the economy from the welfareism to market-based approach. So I won't get into the details of that. I will be a little quick with my presentation. So the roots of agrarian crisis can be traced to the transition of the Indian economy from the deregister regime to the neoliberal policy regime in the early 90s due to aggressive promotion of neoliberalism and emphasis on corporate dominance by multilateral organizations. Now, because of this kind of shift, the repercussions were felt on the Indian agriculture through substantial reduction of capital formation in agriculture, and which was also felt in the form of increase in cost of cultivation due to growing input prices, exposure to world market competition and price fluctuations, and weakening of public sector rural credit system. The Nasimam Committee 1 and 2 also recommended dilution of priority sector lending to the agriculture sector, and as a result, the period between 1995 and 2005 saw a decline in the rural bank branches, which was a reduction of 922 branches, and there was also a decline in growth rate of credit flow to agriculture from 8.7% between 1980 and 1990 to 1.8% between 1990 and 2000. Successive governments also tried to give a push to corporate investment in agriculture, and the onset of contract farming in early 90s is one of the outcomes of this push. Further, for the expansion of corporate dominance in agriculture, Shanta Kumar Committee report in 2015 also recommended the deregulation of MSP and procurement by the government agencies. Now, the impact of these recommendations were seen in the form of 3 farm laws of 2020. The persisting agrarian distress and ever-growing dominance of corporate capitalism led to resistance in the farming community, and the most notable one was the farmers' protest of 2020, which led to the repeal of these 3 farm laws. So, what is contract farming? I'll just define it. In its most simplest and essential sense, it is an arrangement between a buyer and a seller, establishing certain production and marketing conditions for a product. Now, when we are talking about arrangement between a buyer and a seller, the buyer could be a whole range of economic actors. It could be corporate firms, it could be cooperatives, government agencies, traders, and so on. Now, if this is the broad definition of framework of contract farming, then contract farming, which was perceived as an innovation in agriculture marketing system from the entry of the corporates in agriculture from 1990s. So we really need to think that, is it really an innovation for the agriculture marketing? For this, we need to look at some of the historical facts. Now, during the colonial period, Britishers introduced some cash crops like indigo. Now, this was a central expatriate-owned estate surrounded by small outgrowers. In this, the farmers were offered the so-called attractive prices by the British for the new crops, as there was no markets for these. since there was no alternate markets for these, farmers were forced to sell these to the Britishers and they were bound to accept the terms and conditions set by them. So this became exploitative for them. And it was ultimately abolished in 1920s with the very famous Champaran movement. Then contract farming of tea in Assam by the British planters is also an example of contract farming. Similarly, ITC introduced tobacco in southern India, which is also a model contract farming model. It was carefully structured and well accepted by the farming community, but it only targeted educated and economically better off farmers. It continued for several years, like 50 years, but after that, farmers began to feel the balance of power, which was hopelessly tilted towards the company. So the contract system was finally abolished by an act of parliament in 1984, and it was replaced by open auctions. Now, if we look at the post-colonial period, the Green Revolution in 1960s, it was also a case of contract farming because there was an element of assured buyback of produce by the government and provision of inputs at subsidized rates. Now, from the early 90s, there was the entry of corporates in agriculture, like PepsiCo in Punjab, and then the introduction of poplar cultivation in northern India by Vimco. Now, this began to be looked at the particular case of contract farming, which has the dominant presence in the literature on contract farming. And from now onwards, this was perceived to be the case of contract farming. In Punjab, PepsiCo set up a tomato processing plant in the early 90s, which was later sold to Hindustan Lever Limited in 1996. And later, PepsiCo entered into contract farming of potato. Then Punjab was the first state to introduce contract farming program by the government, which was introduced. And this was specifically introduced to tackle the agrarian crisis of the state. Now, contract farming was promoted as a panacea for the ongoing agrarian crisis of the state, but this failed miserably and it was officially declared closed in September 2012. Now, after the Union government's National Agricultural Policy 2000, contract farming has been promoted by the central government to encourage private investments in agriculture. Now, the broad policy architecture for contract farming in India. Now, the states started with their APMC acts in 1960s and 1970s. But somehow the APMCs could not promote the farmers' interest because of various reasons. They were vested in trust because of poor regulations of these APMCs. So the Union government made the first attempt to regulate these markets and introduced APMC Act in 2003. And this was, in this particular APMC, it also allowed direct purchasing, which was contract farming. Now, until 2016, only 6 states adopted all the provisions of this model APMC Act, and another 12 states partially amended. Punjab, West Bengal, Odisha, and Uttar Pradesh hardly adopted 1 or 2 provisions. In fact, Punjab enacted a separate Contract Farming Act 2013, which was outside the purview of APMC, and this was never operationalized in the state. In fact, it was repealed in 2021. Now, the first thing is why Punjab came with a separate Contract Farming Act rather than amending the already existing APMC. Now, there is a political economy reason for this in the agriculture market of Punjab. The conflicting interest between the farmers and the traders, the Artiyas. Now, the private wholesale market under APMC would give us very strong competition to the existing Artiyas, so this would affect their business. So they strongly opposed, and the government brought a separate Contract Farming Act 2013. Now, even after 15 years of bringing APMC Act 2003, which could not be implemented at the state level, now the government on the similar lines of Punjab enacted Model Agricultural Produce and Livestock Contract Farming and Services Act 2018. Tamil Nadu was the only state to enact the act based on this, 2019, but it was also repealed in 2021. Then we all know about the 3 farm laws, in which the second one was the Contract Farming Act 2020, which is known in the popular parlance. Now, when already an act was there, 2018, why the government again brought Contract Farming Act, we really don't know, because government could have actually amended some of the provisions of this act to make it more farmer friendly. picture is missing. I don't know where did it go. So the farmers basically now the why the farmers protested, because I think the farmers' main focus was on Law 1 and Law 2, because farmers feared that this will lead to corporate control. The entry of corporates with these three farm laws will lead to corporate control over agriculture, their land and resources, and also they also feared the end of the MSP regime with the entry of the corporates. So they mainly resisted this contract farming only. Now we need to look at why the farmers resisted contract farming, for which I will be presenting some of the findings of my research, which is based on the field survey in Punjab. Now, one of the most contentious issue with the contract farming is that the companies, they like to engage with the farmers who they think they will maximize their profits. These are the large farmers who have the capital to invest, and thus it leads to exclusion of small and poor farmers. And much of the literature, as we can see from this table, shows that the farmers selected are generally semi-medium, medium, and large. If we look at the percentage distribution of contract farmers, we can see that the contract farmers population is mainly dominated by the medium and large farmers. And even the asset index, which was calculated, also shows that the asset index of contract farmers is higher than the non-contract farmers, which shows that the contract farmers are better resource endowed than the non-contract farmers. And however, if we look at the economic gains from contract farming, there is no denial that contract farming does increases the farmer's income. And much of the literature has pointed out increase in the net returns from contract farming in comparison with non-contract farmers. This is the table which shows, generally the study shows increase only, and these are all the Indian studies for various states. Then one of the major issue with the contract farming is, since this is a monopolistic relation, it tends to become exploitative in the long run, because contract farming is a mode of land control, as has been suggested by an alternative investment model for agribusiness capital to outright land acquisition. So evidence from literature suggests that contract farming might lead to loss of control over land use decisions because of the dominance of the companies, and it increases inequality, and in some cases it might lead to loss of land. Now, if we also look at the contracts signed by the companies, the terms which are laid down in these contracts are itself exploitative. So I have analyzed each and every contract covenant in my research, but because of lack of time, I will just highlight one or two. The first one is the date of inception and termination of contract. The contract makes farmers liable to deliver the produce latest by specifying date, failing which the company is entitled to buy the produce from some other source, and the seller is liable to pay the cost of the seeds and refund the amount paid by the company in advance. However, in case the company fails to procure the produce by the specified date, the farmer is required to keep the produce at cold stores, for which the farmer has to bear the cost. So the company is not, this clause does not talk about penalizing the company. It talks about penalizing the farmer only. Now, if we also see the quality specification, the specific variety and size of the produce is specified by the company. The farmers need to certify for authentication of the produce. It should not be mixed with other varieties. Failing these, the produce will be rejected. And it is a very common criteria. This is a very common the case of breach of contract by the companies. And when they don't want the produce from the farmer, they are getting it at lower prices from some other source. They will form this ground that your produce is not of this particular quality, and they will reject. So this is again biased. Then quantity specification, it specifies quantity of the produce to be procured from a farmer. It gives farmer 10% relaxation in the quantity of the produce predetermined. However, when farmer defaults on more than 10% of the quantity specified, he is bound to pay the price of the shortfall. So the contract document in any of the covenant, it never talks about the compensation to be paid by the company when it breaches the contract. It always talks about the farmer's compensation. Now, when I ask the farmers what kind of issues they face in with the contract farming and also the non-contract farmers with the marketing of the produce, surprisingly, even the contract farmers also indicated low prices. Now, the quintessential element of contract farming is predetermined prices and assured buyback. So why even the contract farmers are pointing out the issue of low prices? So this could be the chance because the companies tend to manipulate as per their needs, and they try to keep the prices generally equal to or little lower than the market prices. Their preference is not to go above the market prices. Then there are also instances of price discrimination because they tend to offer the large farmers better prices than the small farmers, and this was accepted by the large farmers also in the field, that yes, the dealings of the company are better with the large farmers. So if we look at the table of the returns, the average price for potato for small farmer was 600 per quintal. It was 629 for medium and 647 for the large farmer. Now, if there are some issues in contract farming which have serious policy implications, but these issues have been largely unaddressed in the research. The first one is contract farming and the issue of food security. Recently, some studies have started looking at this aspect, but these studies, they emphasize on intermediate outcomes like increase in yield and increase in income because of participation in contract farming, which has a positive impact on food security. But there is another side that contract farming promotes monoculture and then it might hamper the food security, but none of the study has looked into that aspect. Then contract farming, it promotes intensive use of chemicals and fertilizers and intensive use of land and resources. So contract farming is a threat to achieving the second goal of SDGs, but none of the study has looked into the impacts of contract farming and on its environment. Then the participation of labor in contract farming is generally an ignored area in this. Because participation in contract farming might lead to gender division of labor, low wages, insecure seasonal employment, and use of child labor, as claimed in the literature on contract farming, but there is very little evidence from the literature. Now, the key takeaways: agricultural market reforms in India have been long overdue for almost 2 decades because agriculture is a state subject. And contract farming has always been the site of ideological contestations because contract farming is heterogeneous and context dependent. Now, this element of heterogeneity and also the lack of macro level secondary data limits the ability to draw any broad conclusions about the effectiveness of contract farming as a policy tool. So there is a need to focus on macro level impacts like food security, sustainable agriculture, rather than the micro level impacts like yield, income, and profits, on which there is already a very large literature to draw policy conclusions. Now, there are 2 things about contract farming. The first one is we cannot deny that contract farming does provide economic gains to the farmers in most of the cases, but the monopolistic tendencies of this institutional arrangement leads to exploitation because this is largely unregulated, especially in case of India. Hence, in order to make it more farmer friendly, there is need for strong policy measures to regulate the mechanism. So I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Professor.
Good afternoon, and in fact, thank you, Gurpreet, Niveda, and Prachi for setting a context for it. I think I will not have to discuss much about other things. I will, yeah. So, as part of overall credit, I'm talking about credit policies and its inclusivity, because if we talk about the change in overall agricultural policies, it has a lot to do with credit policies, and it changed significantly, not only since the independence, but even during the last couple of decades, policies changed significantly, and its impact on agriculture and particularly farmers has been significant. So again, it's paper, it's basically work in progress. So just a few. So now if we talk about, it's important to understand the characteristics of basic farmers in India. And of course, rural population is heavily dependent on agriculture, land distribution is highly skewed, and more importantly, more than 86% of total farmers in India are small and marginal. and they mostly lack saving, and they have a very low investable resources, and that's quite prominent in various writings, various literature dealing with their saving and investment ratios. So it's basically a kind of low income, low saving trap, which has been very prominent in rural India. So in fact, many in lack of public investment, if there is no public investment in certain area, it is found that private investment is extremely low, and particularly if we talk about marginal small farmers, they lack adequate investment in their farming process. In fact, one of the reasons why we find a productivity difference recently is a lack of investment in the field. So in that sense, and further, in a large part of India is also witnessing a vagaries of flood and drought also, that Gurpreet already mentioned that a large part of that budget is also going into that public budget. The other problem is that if we look at the rural landscape, it has a very, it's also having a kind of discrimination on the basis of caste as well. I will talk about class, but something which is quite ignored in terms of in policy discourse is the exclusion on the basis of caste. So class is very much there. So you talk about caste, marginal class like marginal farmers, small farmers and all, and a whole lot of policy discriminations are there, evident and discussed in various literature. But what is more important is that some level of policy discriminations, inclusivity is also clearly seen on the basis of caste. So I will highlight some of these issues which are largely ignored in, okay. So, but if I will skip all these things, we'll go to the basic trends. So if we talk about financial inclusion, basically I'm talking about access to institutional credit, which is one of the most important aspect of, one of the most important inputs here. So there are two important ways through which one can understand the credit requirement or indebtedness. One, it indicates the level of distress in rural India. If you are heavily indebted, it definitely creates a kind of, it shows the level of distress. And secondly, from a positive point of view, it actually an indicator of bridging the gap between the potential and actual conditions in rural India. If most of the small and marginal farmers are cash drained and lack investable resources, then to achieve optimal productivity, one definitely needs a good level of financial inclusion or access to institutional credit. That's actually bridge the bar between potential output and actual output, and particularly from the point of view of small and marginal farmers who are basically at the receiving end. So, okay, now if we talk about, I'm not following this because I will be slightly brief in talking about overall policies. If we talk about overall credit policies since independence, we can definitely broadly divide the entire policy in three parts. One from 51 to 69, largely dominated by private banking and all. And the share of rural sector was extremely low till 1969. In fact, farmers' share of credit was extremely low. Less than 2% of farmers actually got loans, institutional loans from commercial banks. Share of commercial banks, branches in rural India was extremely low, and that's quite known. And in fact, after 1969, when 12 major banks were nationalized and later 2 were added to that list, this actually changed the provision of institutional credit substantially. So I'm not exactly, so maybe I'm just summarizing everything, so may not be exactly following this because we do not have much time. So if we talk about the period from 1969 to 1980, it has been a stark difference in terms of the provisions of institutional credit. While if you, small and marginal farm, in fact, agriculture sector, the loan disbursement was even less than 2%. By 1990, it increased to 18% 18% of total loans were disbursed to agriculture sector, and overall priority sector lending, which already Nivedita mentioned at some point of time, that 40% of loans was, more than 40% of loans were disbursed to priority sector. Priority sector as defined is consisting of agriculture, small industry, and some self-employment there. There was a provision made in 1972 that 40% of total loans will be disbursed to priority sector. And it was very well implemented by 1990. In fact, the total loans disbursed to priority sector was a little over 45% in 90, and in fact for agriculture the target was 18%, and it actually does 19%. For small scale industries it was 15%, and it reached 16%. So in terms of provision of institutional credit, by 1990 India exceeded the target. But post 1991 the situation was quite different, as already a part of it mentioned by Nivedita also in her paper, that substantially there has been a decline in the share of credit to the agriculture sector because of liberalization and privatization of banks and loosening of the definitions of priority sector. In fact, by early 2000, the definition was twisted in a way that even Pepsi, Kellogg's, and Mahindra Farming became eligible to get priority sector lending. And in fact, a large part of the loans were just Coca-Cola also, for that matter, for Kerala plant, they actually received a huge loan with a proper subsidy under priority sector lending. And in fact, there's a provision of a direct versus indirect loan disbursement. So if you do not give a direct farmer's land and there's a shortfall by the bank, so they used to give that bank used to give that loans to a NABARD or through different channels. If it is invested in rural area, it is considered a part of the priority sector lending. And in fact, large warehouses or private, in fact, service agencies took that loan, and it was kind of called as priority sector lending. And if we talk about the ratios, certain percentage of farmers, total disbursement of credit to the farmers, at the end of 2000 or 2015, the share of the agriculture in total loan disbursement was as low as 7 to 8% in some cases. And in fact, the share of marginal and small farmers was extremely low. In fact, if we look at the data from 1980s, a large part of the loan disbursed to agriculture sector was actually given to small and marginal farmers, and also to the socially deprived section of the farmers. In fact, there's a very important data that it says that the role of diversification of work in rural area during 1980s was primarily credited to institutional loans. In fact, 80% of the total job created in rural area was non-farm employment in 1980s, and primary factor was access to institutional loans. However, that was totally reverted, and in fact, in 2004, now the government actually decided, Manmohan Singh government decided to increase the share of loans in agriculture. In fact, it doubled also, but there was no distinction between direct provision of loans to the farmer or indirect provision. So what happened, if you look at the trend from 2004, I have not summarized all the trends, 2004 to 2015, the share of total institutional loan going to agriculture sector increased significantly, but most part of it were indirect loans. So in fact, the big farmers, in fact, those service providers who were using their loans and whose investments were attached to agriculture actually received a major loan. In fact, if we look at the size of the loan, the maximum share of the loans was there with money over 2 crores. So 2 crores and above loan was dominating the share of total loans in agriculture and priority sector. So that was a kind of striking, because of course no farmers would be interested to take loans in crores. So however, later I would say that in a recent period, 2015 onwards, some changes are basically made, and a couple of changes were definitely positive. One is Jan Dhan Yojana was very popular, but it was actually connecting every farmers with a bank account. But again, my idea is that the inclusivity of the loan, or maybe the inclusivity of farmers with the formal finance, is not a technical problem. It has to do more with a political economy and in fact broad macroeconomic policy structure, rather than just talking about the technical problem of farmers not having bank account. Nevertheless, one definitely needs to understand the importance of opening up bank account with the banks. But the second part of that regulation, which happened in 2015, was more important, that it put some cap on indirect finance to the agriculture. So that was a positive aspect, but the cap was definitely not adequate enough. So cap on the indirect loan was kept very high. So if we look at the inclusivity, the trend of inclusivity, some improvement definitely happened, because now it's not the crores of rupees of loans which are dominating, but rather still even after that cap, if we see the loans with denominations more than 2 lakhs or 4 lakhs, it has extremely high share. So again, if you're talking about small and marginal farmers whose total cost of cultivation is not even 10,000 or 20,000, you can't expect taking them loan for a loan for farming process for 2 lakhs and above. But even after 2015, in the recent period, you see the domination of the loans with the denominations 2 lakhs and above. That clearly indicates that the access to those loans are basically more favorable to large farmers. So now I just moving to, well, I have actually calculated the financial inclusions from the recent NSS data, directly unit level data, that are looking at whether the recent schemes has actually benefited farmers or not, whether inclusivity has increased significantly or not. Though some improvement is there from 2013 and 19 data, but definitely not much. If we talk about bank accounts, in terms of availability of bank accounts, then definitely it's almost done. So everybody in the village are having bank account. It's reported in NSS. It's not official data, but NSS is basically reporting that. Now, KCC, Kisan Credit Card, is the most important and flagship schemes which provides institutional credit, subsidized institutional credit to farmers. And now if we talk about inclusivity in terms of class, this second row says that those farmers who are having less than 0.4 acres of land, who are basically needing the money the most, only 7% of them are having access to KCC. While this ratio is more than 43, nearly 44% for farmers with more than 10 acres of land. And if we talk about institutional loans, all sort of institutional loans, then 58% it's there for 0.4 acres and 73% for farmers with more than 10 acres of land. Now, if we talk about caste categories, this is again discriminatory. We see that, okay, again, in terms of bank accounts, everybody is having bank account, irrespective of their caste structure. But if we talk about KCCs, 70% of ST and 20% of scheduled caste farmers are having loan, while 36.6% are other categories are having KCC loans. In fact, if we remove some of the progressive states like Kerala, and in fact, Chhattisgarh has also achieved a lot in terms of diffusion of financial inclusion to different castes. For other, in fact, for North India, this is much more exclusionary. So I'm not talking about state level differences in this paper. So now, if we talk about the rate of interest, what is very striking here, 8% you expect, KCC provides a 7% rate of interest. Most of the subsidized loans are 8% or below in farming sector. And if we look at, and in fact, needless to say that this is required most by the small and marginal farmers. However, if we look at the percentage of loan which are bearing interest rate less than 8% or equal to 8%, only 20% of the farmers who are indebted are having less than kind of 8% loan. And this ratio is 50% for 10 acres and above farmers. So most of the subsidized loans are basically taken by large farmers. And if we talk about the reliance of smallest farmer, you see that their share of high interest bearing loans are quite high as compared to large farmers. So, and this is total loan. Now, what is surprising is within institutional loans. So you expect no discrimination within the institutional setup. So if banks and official institutional credit agencies are there, you expect a more equitable distribution of loan across caste and class by institutional agencies. But you see within the institutional loans, land size, okay. So here, it's there. So land size less than 0.4%. You see that a substantial section of the land size is getting a kind of KCC loan, which are having a kind of reasonable rate of interest. But if we simply go to, so non-institutional loans, if we talk about non-institutional loans, the bargaining power of small and marginal farmers is really problematic in rural area. And in non-institutional loans, large farmers are bargaining for relatively better interest rate, while small and marginal farmers more than 40% of their loans are bearing more than 25% rate of interest. So basically, the moment farmers are denied institutional credit, they are more relying on non-institutional loans, and non-institutional loans are highly discriminatory for small and marginal farmers. So in fact, in many of the cases, you see that in non-institutional loans, 77% of the farmers belonging to 10 acres and above land are having interest rate more than 15 to 25%. In fact, they have so much bargaining power that they are even converting the percentage of loans in informal sector to more or less equal to institutional sector. But for marginal and small farmers, it's heavily burdened. Similar stories there in caste group. You find that scheduled caste, again, caste-wise distribution less than 8% or equal to 29% scheduled caste and 48% others. You find 15 to 20%, 28% for scheduled caste, and others it's 18%. So you go up in the interest rate, you find the more distribution is there for scheduled caste and marginal and small farmers. So clearly, and it is a general, and in fact, if we talk about, within the non-institutional and institutional loans, in non-institutional also same story is there. The bargaining power of scheduled caste and other caste categories are extremely low as compared to others category of farmers in the non-institutional market. So, but what is surprising is that, again, if we talk about institutional loans, is still 8% and less. The share of that loan is much lower for scheduled caste as compared to others. So even within the institutional loans, the caste discrimination is quite visible. So scheduled caste are not having adequate access to the loans which are bearing less than or equal to 8% rate of interest. Now this table talks about, is there any caste-based exclusion or not? So because now all farmers having less than or equal to 0.4 acres of land, now if you see that within that, it clearly shows that scheduled caste is having access, 15% of loans of scheduled caste is having less than or equal to 8%, while this ratio is for 25%. So it's not simply about class, it's more about caste also, because within the same group of land holding, you find extreme exclusion or discrimination of loans for scheduled caste and other categories of farmers. And you see again for large farms, this is, so 1 and 2 acres, again, this yellow clearly shows that in every category of land size, you find the other category of farmers are having much more access to subsidized loan as compared to other caste. So it's not simply the land holding or class which matters, but caste within that land holding also plays a very important role in terms of exclusion, basically exclusion from this subsidized loans. Even in 10 acres and above, we talk about, okay, when there are large farmers, they might have equal bargaining power, but here it clearly shows that even farmers with more than 10 acres of land, the difference between a kind of access to loans with less than or equal to 8% is quite high, 33% and 53%. It means that farmers having almost single range of lands, more than 10 acres, other farmers are having 53% of total loans bearing 8% of or less rate of interest, while it's only 33% for scheduled caste farmers, large farmers in that definition. So, and now why it is a problem, if we see that the type of loan which are utilized, because the purpose of loan is to bridge that gap between, because farmers are cash drained, they do not have adequate resources. So basically that gap is bridged by institutional loans. Now, if we look at the purpose of loans, most of the farmers which are having lower land, so they are investing, they are basically taking loan for, they are having distress loans, basically taken for meeting their consumption needs, regular daily consumption needs, health related needs and all. So as far as investment purpose is concerned, it's highly tilted towards large farmers. You see that 10 acres and above farmers are using nearly 75% of their loans for either capital expenditure in rural area in farming or revenue expenditure in farming. However, this ratio is only 23% of smallest farmer. So you find a heavy kind of bias for in terms of purpose of loan taken across different size of loans, and this is also true for caste categories as well. So caste categories also, you find the others category of farmers, higher percentage of loans are basically utilized for investment purposes or maybe revenue expenditure as compared to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, which are basically again dominated by their present consumptions or distress consumption. So basically, I will conclude here by saying that if we look at the credit policies or credit inclusion, it's highly problematic, not only with respect to class of the farmers, but also in terms of caste. And more importantly, it's not only that the non-institutional, shifting from institutional loan to non-institutional loan is problematic, because the discrimination lies both within the institutional loans as well as non-institutional loans. Even within institutional loans, disbursement of low interest bearing loans are much skewed in favor of large farmers as compared to small farmers. And that is true also for scheduled caste as compared to large farmers. So one needs to explain, that's 2-3 lines I will just summarize. So like in 90s, there was some cap, some kind of target group approach was there in terms of land access, in terms of caste, in terms of so basically direct share and all, those things are relaxed. So it's very difficult for banks to reduce operational cost. So because now operational cost is very important, therefore even banks are preferring giving bigger loans to a small number of farmers. So that's something which is very inherent in their tendencies. So one needs to address those things by putting some targeted approach, by having some kind of target-based approach towards caste, class, and share of direct versus indirect. Thank you.
Hello. Nilachal, can you hear us?
Gurpreet, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Acharya, we can hear you and see you as well. So
Sorry. Yeah.
continue our discussion. It's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gurpreet. I'm really sorry that I couldn't make to be there or physically. I'm not keeping well. My apologies. So, Dr. Singh and Dr. Sudarshan, I'm really sorry. Uh, yeah, because I have a throat problem, so I may not continue for a longer time to share my thoughts. But let me, in the upfront, put all these questions so that we can have a more debate and discussion for detailing out all these concerns. I'm going back to one of the concerns that raised by one of the professor, and probably you all know, Professor Binod Byaslu was part of the JGSP. I know he used to raise this concern. Acha, before that, let me put this disclaimer. I'm I'm here not representing to any of the institution or organization I'm affiliated to. These are my personal views. So please bear with me. So he used to argue even when pointing this question, do we need a Ministry of Agriculture in India? Do we need a Krishi Bhavan in Delhi? So let me start from there. And then coming to the concerns that Dr. Singh raised, and also the concerns that Sudarshan talked about dryland agriculture, agroeconomic climatic zones, or even the scheme that was initiated by the then EPA government, even prior to that. So there are three important things that probably I wanted to highlight here, and then we'll come to the area specific on the food security, where are we? So first and foremost important concern, or even the ask that I have, are our public policies towards agriculture addressing the concerns particularly relating to the inclusivity aspect. By inclusivity, I mean the concerns of the dryland agriculture or the rainfed agriculture, the concerns of the human farmer, the tribal farmer, the scheduled caste farmer, the tenant farmer. Are our public policies towards agriculture addressing those? Or then when we talk about agriculture policies, obviously it's agriculture and allied subject. How much they are concerned about our allied sectors? So this is the first concern that I have. Second, coming to the questions on public policies towards agriculture and keeping the agriculture production and productivity or the sector in the sustainability mode. Are our policies emphasizing more towards the sustainability aspect? When I mean sustainability, sustainability of growth, not only growth within the sector or the allied component, how it is contributing towards the overall economic growth and its sustainability, employment opportunity created, or even dragging or diversifying agricultural employability in other non-agriculture sector, and also the production and productivity, including the income sustainability. The third and important aspect that I'm raising so that I can follow, I can share my thoughts about other aspects of the agriculture policies. So are our policies leading to ensuring food security, and which probably I will be speaking more in detail. So when I talk about food security, it's about sovereignty, security at what level, and also it's not only the food security, but in the comprehensive social security framework, when we talk about nutrition security, universal health coverage, education status, and it's all social protection issues. So not only making the food available, accessible, and affordable, which is the third, three pillars of food security. So here, when we talk about this food security, are our public policies towards agriculture sector in toto, or the contemporary public policies tilted towards strengthening the public provisioning in the country, or procuring the public provisioning, or purchasing the public provisioning, just to what Dr. Gurpreet was talking about, the sector-wide investment versus the individual farmer-centric DBT schemes. So if at all these three concerns are addressed, then probably we will have a larger debate and discussion on the contemporary agriculture policies. So again, as I just mentioned, agricultural policies cannot be discussed in silo, an individual SLM. Probably it has a comprehensive framework which includes everything. What Dr. Gurpreet started with, the public investment policies or fiscal policies, we call it, or the credit policy Professor Thakur was mentioning about, or the input policies by Prachi, and then the kind of farming practices that Dr. Nivedita was talking about. So when we talk about agriculture policy, it cannot be seen or even looked into or pinned into only the agriculture sector. Rather, it has to have a wider policies towards the macroeconomic fiscal policies, the trade policies, the investment policies, the income policies of the farming community and the allied community. And largely, when we talk about the trade policy, it also has its own connotation when it comes to the agriculture sector. Okay, so since we have very little time, and let me focus on the food security aspect of the agriculture policy. So as I said, agriculture policy cannot be seen in silo, and food security policy, which is the larger objective and goal of the agriculture policies that we are talking about, be it doubling farmers' income, be it reducing the input cost, be it emphasizing the marketing possibility, or even getting the right price to the farmers. So it has its own, the larger objective goal is to ensure food security. I'm not getting into the debate of food security and sovereignty, but at least the food security, when we talk about to my understanding, it has to have at least food security at the household level. Probably we are nowhere near to that. We are talking about food security at the national level, at the state level, but not at the household level. I'm just getting into the point again. Professor Thakur was mentioning about, no, if you look at the class structure of our agrarian community, economy, agrarian community, where almost 86, 87% of our farmers are small and marginal farmers. And they do produce only for a couple of months from the farm, maybe 4 to 5 months, just to ensure at least the bare requirements of the meals for their family. But for the next 7 months, they are dependent either through the PDS system or through the market. And this actually draws the connotation again, the definition of food security, making the food available or accessible or affordable. So these three, again, coming from that angle. So if small and marginal farmers are to be of the household of the family members of the small and marginal farmers are to be ensured or food secure, then we have to ensure food security at their household level. This is what is predominantly happening in the contemporary discussion on food security. So let me give a couple of statistics so that we can be better understand the situation as of now. And also there are contrast pictures. So if I remember when the entire debate was happening on the National Security National Council, when we had this NFSA, National Food Security Act 2013, and we also costed how much resources would be required in terms of universalizing the entire country of providing at least decent amount of food grains. That was, I remember that was 7 kgs based on the nutritional, based on the input or the intake of the house, out of the family members. So we costed around 7 kgs per person per month. Then on an average 5% to that. So even 35 kgs for that, it was not sufficient. But looking at the fiscal capacity at that point in time when we costed for entire 100% food, universalization of the food subsidy or the PDS system, then how much resources would be required and where these resources will come from. Basically, when we talk about the public financing and public investment aspect of the government of India. Okay, there are a lot of debates actually happened in those time. And also the now we have Sri Anna or Anna Sri, that's a millet products that we have, which have been part of the NFSA. I would really appreciate this kind of initiative when the previous to previous, I mean the NPA, sorry, the UPA government, they initiated this. And looking at the argument of saying even those times, I remember they were saying that production surplus or the consumable surplus of the millet products won't be there, so we cannot actually include into the PDS system. Then we had pilot couple of in the couple of states in terms of many of the welfare programs like MDM and ICDS or the supplementary nutrition program. So the nutrition benefit of these millets, and obviously we all know about how the mere year of millets that came in. So during those time also, then the 3 kg of rice or wheat, alternatively 3:1 ratio, and then the consumer price of 3 rupees, 2 rupees, and 1 rupees that came from on the NFSA Act itself. So now we have, based on the 2011 population, the coverage of PDS would be around, as is nowadays, as on date, it's around 81 crore population. So if I recall the entire percentage of priority household category and the general household category to be covered under PDS then in 2013 as for NFSA, that was roughly around 67% of our population. So 75% in rural and 50% in urban. So this 67% of population, so roughly again, if I would say that was around the same population that we is referring to. So then population was 121 crore in 2011 census. Now we have reached 142 crore population, and the coverage is only the same 81 crore as per that. So now the coverage of PDS is only 56%, not 67%. But there are cases, there are arguments, even highlights from the Niti Aayog report saying that around 30 crore population lifted from the poverty. So probably they won't require any kind of public distribution system, food grains, so that they would require That's why they started with the DBT scheme. A lot of discussion and debate happening, but I'm not going to the core of that issue. But the crux of the point that I'm trying to convey here is that we are not covering 67% of the total population through PDS. It's only 56% if you compute out of 142 crore. And the question again, whether we have uplifted this much of population from poverty since 2014-15 till date or not, that's a debatable question. So then coming to the other part, telling the story about the situation, where are we in terms of global hunger index report. And I know there have been, debatable thing in terms of policy discussion about the global hunger index. But let me also confess, this FAO used to produce that SOFI report, State of Food Security report, but unfortunately they haven't actually computed based on the, I don't know, maybe the policy direction from Government of India, and they haven't actually done it for 2023 report. And then for all the dimensions, only undernourished children they have computed based on the available publicly available data. But let me share this. Where are we from on the global hunger index? So in 2023, India has been ranked 111 out of 125 countries. And the score for India is around 28.7%. So this score means, in a scale of 0 to 100, lower the score, higher the security, or the lower the hunger index. So here 28.7% is actually on the higher side, which is 111 out of 125 countries they have ranked. And the important thing is that, it has to be seen in a very temporal trend. It was 38.4, the value, which is now it's 28.7 in 2000. There has been a reduction in the value of hunger, but still we are on the higher account when we rank the country. And if you look at the other neighboring countries based on that methodology, where Indonesia, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, they are far ahead of the improvement and addressing the hunger and malnutrition issues in their countries. So we are lacking behind that. Unfortunately, this is the only survey available where we have this accurate measurement of global hunger, whereas we have adopted this multidimensional poverty index as of now based on the SDG mapping. But unfortunately, the methodology seems to be very debatable and controversial over the time, whether we can accept that on the global scale. Okay, so and then the food security situation, we understood well that we are nowhere addressing the concern of food security for the sake of food security. Rather, we are putting in a different context, saying that food security just to making the food available to the beneficiaries. But when it comes to the production and productivity and availability, and also the procurement system within the given range, so I think India is fairly doing better or well in terms of global production map. Almost 1/4 of the rice production is coming from India on the entire story for last 20-25 years. But making making the food available in the economy or the country may not ensure the security. So when we talk about security, as I mentioned, it has to link with the nutrition security, and it's a universal health coverage. So we are nowhere in there. And then the last point, probably I will share one concern about the food security budget. Many of the things that we link to the food security issue with the availability or the public provisioning towards the food security, yes, India is taking much burden, especially the union government is taking much burden towards ensuring food security through food subsidy budget, which is almost close to 2 lakh crore annually in the recent budget. So what is more important, that if you add another two important development schemes, or the schemes which are directly related to food security or the nutrition security, is the midday meal program in schools, or the Anganwadi program, the supplementary nutrition program. So here, if I add on the total beneficiaries in absolute term, 81 crore under PDS, around 10 crore under MDM for the school kids, and another 10 crore for the preschool and the pregnant and lactating mother and adolescent. So almost 100 crore population in India. To some extent, they are secured food. Maybe I would say 60%, 70%, not fully, because it doesn't ensure that the balanced diet that would be required to make the body secure, food secure, or the nutrition secure. Yes, but how it is to be seen within the context of the agriculture policies in terms of procurement, in terms of providing MSP, in terms of distribution, in terms of accessibility to the food security system in the country. So I'm concluding here again, raising all these three important concerns I raised in the beginning of my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya. And now we'll take questions on all the presentations from the floor, and maybe a couple of questions if we can.
Thank you very much for very rewarding presentations, and they all link with each other. And that's what I thought the policy forum was expected to attempt, and so the foundation has been laid. But the discussion now that we need to carry out can take several directions. I know that, but the direction that I have in mind is that when we talked of post-independent period, we thought of a path which made use of whatever possibilities at that time scientists had right through it at the international level as well as at the national level. That's a high external input system of varieties, and as well as external inputs being used to maximum extent in areas which are well endowed. And the dryland agriculture was not that much the focus at that time because the urgency of food security directed us towards certain states. So if you take the spatial inequality, which has been implicitly discussed, but continues to remain, but that's a inequality at the level of the very farming systems which we chose. That's the point number one. What are the alternatives over the period in science? And if you look at ICR system, there are important trends which have to be taken note of. And I would take note of one at the moment. Because organic agriculture gets talked quite a lot, but I think integrated farming systems approaches don't get as much emphasis, and I don't think the attention of the social sciences has gone towards that as well. We are just 90 kilometers away from here, the location of the head office of the All India Coordinated Research Project on Integrated Farming System, that's Bodhipura. And I think it's not very far from also Jindal institution. And I think integrated farming system approach at the moment is being developed in collaboration with only 4 states. And the 4 states are Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, and Jammu and Kashmir. And there is virtually no union government support. An integrated farming system means actually tackling the risk of the farmers in a very different manner, that is increasing the enterprises itself. It's both in crop husbandry, animal husbandry, off-farm, rural, non-farm, at the level of the farmers. So this farming system approach is different from the one which we utilized it in during the Green Revolution period. This particular farming system would require innovations at the institutional level, but there aren't any institutional innovations coming. Both at the landscape level, whether there used to be programs, as they were mentioned about whether it was in soil conservation or in water management, the programs which were technically developed. This a landscape level planning is not there as yet, even in the case of integrated farming system approaches, because it's addressing farm level. At the credit level, bank finance and other programs, you will need again huge amount of institution. So what I'm saying is the sources of innovation which could come from at one particular point in time in respect to the farming system need to be rethought of. So when we're talking of policies, we're talking of choices in technologies, choices in institutions, point number one. Point number two, are there really choices in technology even at the level of individual inputs? Prachi was talking about, cow dung as if it is the only alternative. No. In fact, organic is itself a limiting approach. What I take normally is that if you integrated farming systems integrate animal husbandry, crop husbandry. Within crop husbandry, you have intercropping as far as it's concerned. Now pulses is one very important source of nitrogen. Let's say if you were in crop rotation, you have pulses everywhere. And pulses have been excluded from the wheat and rice rotation as far as it's concerned. If they were included, quite a lot of nitrogen can come from that, and your dependence on the external input will go down. Even in the case of phosphate and potash, there are alternate sources, and phosphate fixing trees are there. There are sources which are even otherwise the crop residues and animal residues which can actually be used. It's for potash possible, phosphate possible. When there was a discussion going on, I was looking at the internet. What are the papers which are the recent one which have emerged in all these cases, etc. There are a huge amount of papers in the case of how biological fixation is an important source. Other than cow dung, crop residues are also available, and variety of other sources are available. And even if animal husbandry is improved, even the sources of potash can be improved as far as is concerned, as well as potash is concerned. Because we have in all our animal, so can be source of residual manuring. And it can be an important source. So what I'm saying is organic is very limiting, but for intercropping and crop husbandry and animal husbandry. So I would like us to have more interdisciplinary research. The sciences, technologies which became the basis of at one time policy formulation. And similarly in dryland farming, if I come to talk of it, there are various alternatives which are being thought of as far as concerned. And I think to cut the story short, I can't monopolize all the time, and I would stop here. And if any discussion starts, I won't mind intervening again. And that's the kind of approach with which Kisan Mazdoor Commission is very much interested, and we would be very keen to collaborate in any possible manner with the department that Sudarshan and Singh and Aisha, and Gurpreet and all the friends are today there. And I know all of them, they are from, most from JNU. So, and I think it's a very, very rewarding experience. Thank you very much.
With the permission of Professor Singh only.
No, why don't we have a few questions? We'll come back. Otherwise, we'll be already over time.
Prachi, fertilizers, thank you so much. I come from the energy side, and the fertilizer production is heavily fossil fuel based, natural gas. You mentioned some level of fertilizer import dependency, price hikes, also shortages. I'd be interested in your perspective on the possibilities of green hydrogen fertilizer production domestically as some kind of solution to various issues.
I have a question for Dr. Gurpreet. So, for my research, I did a field study in Punjab, and there I was told in an interview that the Sarpanch of the village gets yearly funds for village development and agriculture development, out of which 50% are where the guidelines are provided by the government, 25% is supposed to be spent on sanitation, and 25% the Sarpanch has the jurisdiction to spend in the village. Now, in the interview, he reported that since in the last 3 years, the sanitation facilities are up to the mark, and that 25% is lying just dormant. There is no jurisdiction over that. It will not get approval, and the need is also not there. So they have a dormant fund lying with them, which they cannot spend, they cannot use, they cannot. So can you address that, how situations like these can be taken care of?
A few quick ones and then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for the very insightful discussions. I may start from a historical perspective, just like from the case of River Nile, which has flourished Egyptian civilization for several thousand years, but later on when cash crop introduced like cotton, uh, because of the surface morphology and the water channel, it has affected, and since then River Nile is struggling because of that, because of the swapping of the crops, right? So sometimes surface morphology plays a key role, and bringing the another dimension, we are losing the topsoil, which is the nutrient soil of Earth's surface, right? And it is draining inside the ocean. Roughly, it is around 20 to 25 pyramids of Giza. It is equivalent to 20 to 25 pyramids of Giza. The soil that is draining, which is the topsoil. And another study indicates that in terms of Indian context, our nutrition value for the crop that we are yielding now is getting reduced if we compare it from the last decade or several other decades, right? Still, we are using NPK based fertilizer. So initially, it was like a petrochemical based fertilizer. It was basically maybe Rockefeller thing, and then later on it came to NPK based fertilizer. So I don't have any question there, but I have some suggestion from practice perspective, because I am bringing the thinking and systems perspective into this approach, where I was seeing this as a production of this fertilizer and pesticide, but it has impact on soil as well as crop. And later on, there is a paper from, I guess, Netherlands, that the study indicates that the pesticide that we are using is having long-term damage to the environment, soil, and as well as the biodiversity. Right? So I'll be having, maybe I'll asking some suggestion on that to bring the complexity or not complexity. Thank you.
You want to? No, okay. So there are clearly some serious technical questions which I don't know whether we have either the expertise or the time to react to. But the bigger point that's coming out is that we can't divide the technology from the policy, and that these have to go hand in hand. So you have to answer that question in policy terms. I have one or two specific, then I'll ask bigger question. And they're all linked, as we have heard. So Gurpreet, you mentioned that the budget allocation per household unit in various states vary a lot, and some get really low budget allocation. I wondered as to what was driving that low budget allocation. Was it that maybe the allocation is really, they are looking perhaps at how this budget will help in economic growth or contribution of agriculture to growth rather than the livelihood of the farmer, it might be. So I wanted to raise that one, which clearly is linked to the neoliberal reforms, right? And then Prachi, I wanted to just raise the issue of linking the fertilizer subsidy to land ownership. You raised that issue, which is quite interesting. As I recall, I didn't hear the MSP issue come up much this morning, but the Swaminathan Commission had tried to do the same thing, right? To link the MSP to land ownership, and therefore we have clearly a lot of equity issues. People who don't have land, then what happens? The data has raised the issue of contract farming, and again the link to the neoliberal reforms that we are seeing comes up. So if the contract farming fails and MSP is a challenge, clearly MSP is inimical to a neoliberal kind of thinking. I am worrying now about whether the culture of agriculture in India is essentially socialist in nature and therefore completely inconsistent with the current policy regimes that we are working under. And if that's the case, and Avanindra, you illustrated it as well, because you also linked in your work, you observed that land size of less than 0.4 acres. I noted from your for the non-institutional loans, nearly 45% of people seeking loans who have less than 0.4 acres would be looking at more than 25%. They are almost in the 50% interest rate. And then you have intersectionality with caste. So now we have a situation in which even if we try to link macroeconomic policy and agriculture and subsectors, we can't solve these issues. So here is my bigger question. Those were small illustrative questions. The real question is, so who is doing public policy in this country? You academics are busy finding everything that is wrong. Are we talking to policymakers? Are we going to ever get any change, or are we forever going to be critical of the system? That's my main question, and I'd really like to see us make a contribution. Response, yeah.
So, just to first take up Hanesh's question about what are we doing and is there a policy response that is happening. I would like to say that after repeated writing about the fertilizer thing, what has happened is that government was forced to bring in the controls back in October on the DAP and potash prices. Otherwise, what you saw here, which stopped at 36,000 per ton, would have gone to 40-50,000 per ton in terms of rupees. So I think that is significantly achieved by repeated writing about fertilizers, the price decontrol that is happening. About the part that, so cow dung that I used was an example. I'm not saying that I would like to have chemicals in my food as well. Like eventually we have to move to a long-term sustainable system, but those long-term sustainable systems take time. The pulses example that you gave, so I have in my previous work analyzed 10 major pulses, and as a part of a global economy of pulses report that was published by FAO. And what happens with pulses is that when you grow pulses, in the next cropping cycle, after 2-3 years of growing pulses, you have to leave the land fallow because there's too much nitrification that happens. You cannot grow paddy or wheat in that land immediately after 2-3 years of pulses. So that's a technical issue that has to be taken care of. Regarding crop residues, if you pull back crop residues in the soil and you want to use that as a fertilizer, that's a fantastic technique, but you need technology to put that crop residue back into the soil, and that's a technology that is much more expensive compared to the urea bag that is available in the field. So integrated management systems, as you rightly said, is a great thing, but you do not have the required infrastructure to make that go. As you said, only 4 states are doing it right now, and 4 states are also not doing it at that scale that is required. So I am saying that all these other measures that you have are extremely good, but they'll take time to, say with the National Hydrogen Green Mission, that these will take time to catch up to the scale that we need to maintain our food production. If we slash chemical fertilizers right now and get moved to organic means or other integrated systems, those kind of systems will not, you will have a drop in the yields. And that's a drop that we cannot afford at the moment. Those are long-term systems and will require long-term changes.
It's a very normal response, Prati. I'm not surprised, but we'll discuss it.
Yes.
Yeah, very normal. It will take a long time to read.
Yeah. There is a huge amount of work which has been done in concrete.
Anybody else wants to respond? Anything? We have to wrap up.
Yes, it's a fantastic measure.
I think Professor Naresh's point is very important, but I think the debate which is created there is very important because when Manmohan Singh government actually said that the government would double the credit, and it actually doubled after a couple of years, but then lots of paper were actually dedicated to the how those credits are utilized. In fact, because of that, many papers were there in 14, 13 and 14, and then in 15, government came up with capping the indirect credit limit. So, but yet, and what so I think that important that impact is there. But what is important here, in particularly in my paper, that even now when you talk about inclusivity in farm policies, caste is caste is clubbed with class. So that difference is not very much recognized. So first, in my sense, here is that one needs to, the government needs to recognize that problem, that it is not simply the problem of class. So the difference was quite high even within the class category. The difference was quite high. So first, it is important for them to recognize the problem. So I think that's the role here needs to. Yes.
Yes, Nilachal, if you want to share your views.
Yeah, I mean, just the last point Professor Singh was talking about. I mean, on the who is discussing on the public policies and where and to whom. I think one of the important aspect, what just Professor Thakur mentioning about the recognizing the problem. And if there is an acknowledgement and recognition, just like we discussed about the dryland and or the rainfed agriculture, we probably don't need the kind of investment even that was there I mean, late 80s, what Gurpreet presented, 3.1%, close to more than 3% of GDP in agriculture. Even this kind of, and the present kind of investment, if we tweak the different framework, then probably we can address most of the concerns that we have in the agriculture sector. Just giving an example of, again, bringing the inclusivity aspect. And then the question that was posed to Gurpreet, maybe he will come, but I can also share about the panchayat decision of the sarpanch. So probably the DBT scheme that Gurpreet presented about, the direct benefit transfer of the cash kind of thing, either on the interest subvention or the PM Kisan Yojana, uh, do we really need all this kind of investment, or even the expenditure happen at the and the decision happen at the Delhi level, and banks are involved in delivering these services? Or can we pass these resources to the panchayat, where the panchayat sarpanch can take care of deciding what needs to be done at the panchayat level for inclusive planning and implementation, bringing the farmers together and discussing the local needs there? And this is what exactly we had the entire plan of 30 years ago on decentralized process. And the question on the panchayat thing, I don't know whether which state you are talking about your case study was, if it was Rajasthan or any other state. For example, we have discussed about agriculture is a state subject. Why do we need all these policies to happen where it comes to doubling farmers' income or addressing the local needs of supply chain management or the production, post-production processes, where the panchayat is there in terms of as a local governance unit to handle? Okay, we talk about trade policy, export policy, import policies, which are required at the Delhi level, which probably may not be solved at the panchayat level, but at least in terms of what is there and required by the farmers or needs of the farmers can be addressed by the panchayats. The panchayats needs to be empowered. So I think this is what is the concern that you have been raising. On the panchayat thing last, Gurpreet, I would
Yeah,
suggest
yeah, we have very
the
less.
state finance commission probably asked to prioritize on 50% for agriculture and 25% funds on the nowhere areas. I don't think that kind of conditionality should be put by the state finance commission or to the panchayat sarpanch. So I think we need to empower or capacitate the panchayats or address the capacity gaps at the panchayats level, because agriculture subject has been devolved to the panchayat as well. It's no longer as a state subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilachal. So you got the answer. Okay, 50% and 25% remained unutilized. So on the question of specific question of Professor Naresh about the state's capacity to spend on agriculture, why some of the states are lagging behind, we have to look at these questions in a macroeconomic framework, because some of the states are really, struggling with raising in terms of mobilizing the resources. So, especially after the implementation of GST, most of the states are having left with few, uh, execution of few taxes they can raise. And further in 2002 we have the government of India imposed FRBM Act. So complying with all the different acts to consolidate the fiscal conditions of states and further centralization of resource mobilization have put serious concerns on the resource mobilization capacity of all the states. So this is one of the can be explanation to this. And the question about integrating all the aspects of technology and alternatives in agriculture policy, I do consider that. And maybe we have to look for further collaboration that Professor Singh and Professor Sudarshan, they are envisaging to have more collaborative research with science institutions and how we can go forward explaining the answers. So with that, I stop here. So Nivedita.
All right, well, it only remains now to say thanks again to all of you for coming, and thank you very much for coming and having, this is such an important policy conversation. The follow through to this, of course, we are going to be looking at the public policy schools, working with agriculture universities, making networks. The discussion that occurred here today should go out in print, in some write-up, in one of the popular media. Let's get that conversation stirred up as much as possible so that the investment of the time that you made would not have been lost. Thanks again for coming. We'll see you again soon.
carbon market space. So I just heard about this topic. So otherwise, when you use your all your a couple of questions, that's just a good time to. No problem, which is why I just wanted to check. Another thing is so, using so many people, exploitative nature of the contracts, and they're not, so they get
They have been looking at the farm side, but not the landscape. So they are very much interested in developing institutions more the landscape. Like they used to be evolution of commons or marine and animal husbandry would go into all that. Fisheries included in many of the places.
and